Jessica Sica, Head of Information Security at Weave. With 20 years of extensive experience in overseeing and directing cybersecurity programs, Jessica is an accomplished senior information security leader. She has helped create and drive cybersecurity efforts for companies including Daybreak Games, Petco, and currently Weave. Her experience in networking, compliance, information security, auditing, and infrastructure has helped provide Jessica with a holistic view on potential threats and necessary proactive initiatives for enterprise-level businesses. Jessica will be sharing with us how to demonstrate the business value of cybersecurity at a time when breaches are seeming to happen more often and more publicly. She will also be discussing what this means for application development. Please join me in welcoming Jessica Sica.
Thank you for the introduction. Really appreciate that. I'm going to pull up some slides here, but happy to be here. Glad I was invited and have the opportunity to speak. Hopefully, what I say will be educational, if not at least interesting. So I'll do my best to cater to the audience. Some of the information I have on here may be basic, especially the first few slides. So bear with me as I get through a little bit of background, but we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide, the obligatory about me, which we covered a little bit already. But let's go ahead and click on that next slide. Technology. We'll get it here. There we go. That is me. I'm not going to go over everything that was already been said. Just going to talk about some other things. I am in security and I'm not a very strong coder, but I do like to dabble in it, mostly web-based coding. I've created some PHP, MySQL type stuff for online for some of my hobbies. I have a trail race business where I put on some running events around San Diego and Orange County. I'm a softball player and a coach. And I am editor-in-chief of an Angels fan site. Unfortunately, yes, I am an Angels fan, but I'm also a Padres fan now that I live in San Diego. So I have two chances for disappointing teams to not disappoint me. So we'll see how this season goes. Just going to jump ahead to the agenda and we'll go through that real quick before we get into the fun stuff. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what is cybersecurity. Everybody here may know this already. I'll talk about security by design, which is very applicable to application security. Why do you need to prove the value of security? We'll go into that, as well as what is the impact of data breaches, and I'll share some fun numbers there as well. The challenges of proving value. This is really where the meat of the presentation is going to be. Instead of putting something together where I'm like, this is what you need to do to prove value, I'm going to just talk about some of the roadblocks and challenges and how you get over them. So that's where we will focus a lot of our time. We'll touch a little bit on security as a business enabler and then some resources that you can visit in your free time after the presentation. So what is cybersecurity? It's really digital security, right? Cybersecurity is different from information security, even though a lot of people use it interchangeably. Information security covers often physical. It might cover documentation, like physical documentation. Digital security is what cybersecurity is. It's a term that a lot of people use, and a lot of people use information security. At my current job, I'm actually in charge of all security, so we don't really call it cybersecurity. It's information security. Actually, we just call it security because physical does fall under my job to some extent as well. Cybersecurity systems should be secure by default and by design. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Best security is multi-layered. Think about security at your house. You have a lock on the door. Somebody might be able to pick the lock. If that's the only security you have, that's not going to be very effective. There really isn't one security tool or one security process that is going to solve everything. If you have a vendor who tells you that one security tool is going to solve everything, they're lying. And I've certainly had vendors tell me that. It doesn't work. You need more than one tool to get the job done. You just have to be careful not to run into tool fatigue, which I'll also talk about a little bit. And then security is about protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. The Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency actually calls security, this is a direct quote, the art, I love this, it's the art of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. The reason why I like that it says the art is because it's not an exact science. Some people will think you need to do security a specific way, but that doesn't really work everywhere you go. You can't just take a one-size-fits-all approach, a scientific approach to security. It's much more of an art. So we'll go on to the next slide. What's your favorite? I just saw the chat. What's your favorite angle? Definitely obtuse. Definitely obtuse. Security by design. Here's some steps for security by design. It should be a core business requirement. It's not a feature. Security should never be a feature. It starts during the design phase of anything that you're putting together. You want to minimize your attack surface, so you're going to restrict functions to the minimally amount necessary. Anybody who's ever dealt with ACLs or firewalls knows that you deny by default, and then you add things as you go along. You don't add everything by default and then take things away, because usually things get left open when that happens. And I have a fun story about that later in my presentation. So same thing with secure defaults, set to high security, and then back off where you need to, but don't back off by default. Least privilege. Don't give somebody admin access. I once worked at a company that had 78 domain admins, and I said, how many people actually need domain access? It was about 4. They don't need it, don't give it to them. So fail securely. Access should fail closed, not open. And then no trust by default. Everybody's heard zero trust. Zero trust is not a perfect world. No trust by default is a difficult place to get to. I think very few companies get there unless they're very, very highly regulated. Maybe government, banks might get there, but it's a good philosophy to live by. Don't assume trust is something that I take into my security world. So let's go on to the next one. So why do you need to prove the value of cybersecurity? If you can't prove the value of cybersecurity, why are you there? Why should you get more staff? Why should you get more budget? Proving the value is going to help you enhance the safety of the company data. It's going to prevent incidents and breaches, or at least minimize them. I think even the world's best security programs are going to be prone to an incident or breach, but you can minimize the prevalence of them if you have proven your value of security and have gotten the resources that you need. Of course, maintaining compliance is important, and that's one way that you can very easily prove the value of security, because compliance can get you into trouble real fast. And if you want money, you need to be able to prove why you need it. And build the security team, not built, sorry for the typo. Staffing, you're not going to get staffing if you can't prove that what you're doing is valuable. Let's go on to the impact of security breaches. Loss of company reputation. This is a big one. This happened. I used to work for PlayStation. I know a couple of people work here. In 2011, PlayStation had a very large breach that cost almost $200 million. Had a huge loss of reputation. The PlayStation network was shut down for 30 days. When people can't play their video games, they tend to not be happy. So that's what happened there. And it wasn't a real good situation. The company definitely lost reputation. Very, very large companies can sometimes recover from that. And obviously PlayStation is still in business, so they have. But it is very impactful, and especially if you're a smaller company. Of course, financial loss, business interruptions, lawsuits, these are all risks of security breaches and impacts, compliance issues and fines, business interruption. You can take your business down, of course, with a breach, and often do, especially if it's ransomware. And then loss of intellectual property. Somebody might break in and steal your very valuable data that you want to keep private. A few more facts I'm going to share before we go on to the next slide. But one study says 74% of consumers become less likely to trust a company after a breach. That's a pretty high number. That's a pretty important number. I think when you're talking about the business value of security, one of the things you can do is share a lot of data. Code Spaces is a former SaaS provider. I actually work for a SaaS company now. Code Spaces, this was some years ago. They were accessed via Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud control panel. The breach actually shut them down. The company doesn't exist anymore. So they were a smaller company that really couldn't weather that type of impact. Equifax, huge company. They spent $1.4 billion on that 2019 data breach. Very impactful. Of course, they're still in business, but you can't tell me that $1 billion didn't impact even a large company like that, because it did. And then in 2013, Yahoo had a data breach, actually wasn't revealed until 2016. That cost almost $500 million, and definitely a lot of loss of trust there. Not a lot of people really, I mean, I don't know a lot of people who use Yahoo anymore. It's still in business, but they lost customers. They had details of their entire 3 billion user base exposed, and that's going to have an impact. So security breaches have a huge impact, and it's important to remember that, and it's important to share that with others when you're trying to prove the value. So the challenge is to proving the value of security. Lack of awareness. Some people just don't know, and I'll go into more details on all of these, so I'm just going to cover these briefly. Budget constraints, status quo. There's companies that are resistant to change. There's other companies who will say it doesn't grow the business or it's not aligned with the business, so why should we be doing security? Or maybe people think they're not a target. I will talk about that. Everybody's a target. Communication barriers. Maybe there's just a communication barrier to how you're talking about security. You don't prove value overnight. That's just something that I want to talk about as well. It takes time, especially if you're new to a role. Security is a journey, not a destination. I'd like to think Ralph Waldo Emerson actually said that. He said life is a journey, but security is a journey, not a destination. You're never going to get to the exact place that you want to go to, but you are definitely going to enjoy the journey along the way and make improvements along the way. All right, so we're going to talk about overcoming the challenges, improving the value of security. And the first one is going to be lack of awareness. So we will go on to that. Do your decision makers understand the impact of insufficient security? I think a lot of people maybe assume that they do, but do they really? In my experience, they don't always understand the impact of security. So you need to help them understand that. Are there compliance issues that are not being taken care of? Sometimes leadership doesn't even know that because they're not in the trenches. So that's another point of awareness that you need to make sure you're covering. Is there a training and awareness program in place? Of course, every company needs a security and awareness training program because how are you expecting the company to change if you're not educating them on what's going on with security? So sharing facts and data about the impact of security incidents and breaches. Some of those I just shared with you, talking about common causes of data breaches. I have a list down there: hacking, human error, malware, insider attacks, social engineering. That is not an exhaustive list, but it's good data to have when you're talking to somebody about the value of security and helping make them aware. There's probably types of attacks that your company is vulnerable to that you haven't told anybody about. They don't know, so how would they if you haven't told them? Updating the board and decision makers on recent security incidents. Take that opportunity if something is in the news, talk about it. And maybe you talk about what we're doing right in that situation, if that attack came to us, or what we could be doing better. What would the impact be on us if that attack happened? I think that's very valuable. So use real world examples, because if it's a big enough security incident, the board and your decision makers are going to know about it. They're going to hear about it. They're going to hear about it from their peers. They're going to read about it. So it's important to use that in your proving the value of security. So are there gaps in compliance? Do the decision makers know what the cost is of non-compliance? For instance, with PCI DSS, you can be fined up to $100,000 a month if you are non-compliant with PCI DSS. That's a pretty big amount of money and probably would justify spending $20,000 or $30,000 getting compliant, right? If it's going to be $100,000 a month. If somebody has a hand raised, are we going to take questions as we go? I don't mind.
I just want to know what PCI IDS. Did I miss the definition?
The what?
PCIDS.
Oh, yeah, PCI.
You used an acronym, and I don't
I
have no
did, yeah,
idea what the
sorry.
acronym is. I know we have
Sorry.
cybersecurity people here, but some of us are not quite there yet.
And you know what? That's actually in my presentation later about communicating with executives is not using acronyms because not everybody knows what you're talking about. So it's the credit card compliance and how you handle credit cards. So you can actually get fined up to $100,000 per month per credit card issuer if you're not compliant with the regulation. So that could actually cost you up to $300,000 per month of not being compliant. So those fines can add up really fast. And it's a real easy win to say, here is the value of being compliant with PCI DSS and protecting our customers' credit cards. Because if we don't, it's going to cost us a substantial amount of money. So are you training the entire company on security? Awareness isn't just about talking to the decision makers. You want to build a culture of security from the bottom up and the top down. So I think that's important to do as well. Did developers get trained on security? There are a lot of software engineers on this call right now. Is your company training developers on security as well? Developers can be good partners. in proving the value of security, because developers usually report through a different organization, speak a little bit of a different language, understand things a little bit differently. I am not an application developer. I understand it enough to do security for it, but I certainly can't speak in the weeds of it like somebody who's doing it every day. So I think training them and partnering with them is very valuable as well. Go on to the next slide. That was lack of awareness. So budget constraints, this is a big one. Every company has a budget that they need to stick to. I came into security is usually not top of mind until people get burned. That's absolutely true. Unfortunately, it's very true. I've seen it everywhere I've worked. Um, you have to sell it and you get a certain amount of security done, but until there's, I think PlayStation is a great example. That breach, they completely transformed their security staff and hired about 30 new people to run security after that. So sometimes people wake up when something happens, unfortunately. But my goal, and all of our goals, is to not let it get to that point, because nobody wants a company to get into that much trouble. So we want to prove the value before we get there. So decision makers, do they understand the impacts of insufficient security? We talked about some of those numbers. We talked about the compliance part of it. We talked about training and awareness. Here's the average cost of a data breach. That's pretty valuable to share. In 2023, it was almost $4.5 million was the average cost of a breach. That's going to probably be a lot more if you're a larger company, of course, and a little smaller if you're a smaller company. But it doesn't mean a smaller company is gonna get off easy, because it's still going to be substantial enough, and the lawsuits alone can take down a smaller company. So you can't just throw money at the problem. If I could, I would, have a $5 million security budget, right? That's not the answer. Can you execute on it? Can you be pragmatic about your spend and your tools? Did the tools that you have make sense? Do you have too many tools? If you're just asking for money for the sake of just buying things and adding staff, that's not going to go over well. The way you get budget is to prove value. Proving value takes time. You can use metrics. You can show a return on investment. If you have existing security tools, how are they performing? Let's see those numbers. Are they valuable? Is the $100,000 tool you bought last year helping protect us? How can you show that? That's how you can get additional budget. So when I came to Weave last year, I came in January, so the budget was already set. So I had to put some things in place during the year last year to argue for budget for this year, which we did increase our spend, and we'll increase it again next year. But it's not an easy task, but you need data to back it up, and you need a good pragmatic plan to back it up as well. Status quo. If I could have everybody speak out loud, I would, but how many have been in an environment that's resistant to change? Probably a lot of us, right? Companies do things a certain way. They like to do things a certain way. They like to do security a certain way. I've come into companies that have been doing security. When I went into Daybreak, we've been doing security this way for ever since we had a security program. It's like, well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do things, right? Maybe it was effective enough at the time, but security risks, security vulnerabilities, they change, they evolve. If you're not evolving your program, then you're in trouble. So one of the ways you can do that is foster a culture of change. Maybe you can't affect the entire company, but you can affect key people. You can affect key leadership. You can affect key people in IT. If you can get leadership buy-in, this will help you tremendously in fostering a culture of change. It can take time. You have to promote the benefits of change, build a track record, build trust. If you have a track record, people are going to be a lot more willing to trust you when you want to change something, and don't change everything all at once. I would never come into a company and say, I want to drop this tool, this tool, this tool. I want to change this process and that process. People are going to say no. So be careful about how fast you introduce change, and make sure that the change makes sense. Once people start buying into that culture of change, you'll be able to introduce more. So start small, and then it grows from there. Are stakeholders too comfortable with this currently being done as enough? If they are, then they're probably in the wrong mindset, because you can never do enough when it comes to security. There's always more you can be doing. You should never be sleeping sound at night thinking I'm never going to get breached or I'm never going to have an incident. So that's not the case. So some people do think that way in businesses, and you need to help them change that mindset. Assess everything regularly, every process you're doing, every tool you have. Look at it every year or whenever the contract is up. If you have a security tool that's, you bought for 3 years, in 2.5 years, you should probably start looking and seeing if that tool makes sense. Is it doing what it should be doing? Can you improve the value of that tool still? And if you can't, then you should probably get a different one. Awareness and training can help here with fighting the status quo. The more awareness you get around it, the more people are willing to change and do things differently when it comes to security. And then make sure you involve other teams in your risk management process, include your developers if you're making software. Almost every company is a software company. I'll talk about this on another slide. You may not be specifically a SaaS company, but everybody's doing some sort of development work somewhere, and those are good people to get on board. And as I said on the bottom, don't change everything all at once. That is not going to go over well. And building relationships with key leaders, I recommend a security steering committee if your company doesn't have one. Then build one and get key leaders from across the org into that. Use that opportunity to talk about security, what's going on in the world, what's going on with the company, what your plans are, what you want to do. It's a good way to get buy-in. And once you get buy-in from the top, it's a lot easier to foster change. So security doesn't grow the business. It's not aligned with business. This is a common problem. You can present security as a business enabler. Security isn't about just stopping people from doing things. That was kind of the culture that I came into when I was at Daybreak Games, is security was there to tell people no. If you are in the business of telling people no when you're in security, they're just going to go around you and you're going to have bigger risks. So you need to work with people and enable what they're trying to do and not just tell them no. If they come to you with something really silly and ridiculous, and you probably want to say no, have a meeting, talk with them. What are they really trying to accomplish? Can we do this a different way that's more secure? That's the way to approach that instead of just telling them no, because if you're telling people no, you're not an enabler, right? So understand the business and what direction they're going. If you're trying to prove the value of security, you need to understand what the business is doing. You need to understand where the business is going. You need to understand what the strategy of the business is. You need to understand what new markets they might be trying to get into. All of those things will play into how you can better present security. As an example, making security a business enabler. Let's say you want to get high trust certified. So high trust is a certification for handling healthcare data. And you go to somebody and say, hey, we want to get high trust certified. Okay, great. What does that mean? But if you go to them and say, if we get high trust certified, we can better sell to the medical market. That's a business enabler, right? So it's a matter of how you phrase it and how you approach it if you want to get that done. And again, partnering with senior leaders, you got to partner with them. What matters to them? Most of the senior leaders, just like the board, don't necessarily care about security. They care about the business risk. They care about the dollar sign. They care about the bottom line. So you have to find a way to make security fit in there. Everything you're doing with security, maybe it fits into brand reputation. If you're working on a security project, how is this going to help protect the brand? How is it going to help protect our customers, our employees? How will it help protect our supply chain? Maybe you have a list of things that your company needs protecting as far as a company risk management perspective and not security, and then take your security goals and make them fit into those. Customer service forward. I like to use this as a good example of aligning with the business and providing better security. How many people have been to, many of us have been to very intrusive websites with multi-factor that keeps kicking you out. They just have a really difficult user experience because they are trying to make it extra super secure, and your password needs to be 20 characters. And then some of us have probably been to Amazon and realized their security works pretty well because they are very secure with their logins, but they do a lot on the back end. They do a lot of adaptive type things. Like if you log in Escondido, where I live, and then 5 minutes later log in from China, they're going to notice that. And then they're going to say, oh, there's an issue. Instead of making you change your password every 30, 60, 90 days, they're going to look at other factors which are going to make you more secure, but be less of a barrier to the customer. So there's definitely ways you can balance security with customer experience and be more secure and better enable the customers, which is an easy sell to the business, honestly, if you can do that. So we'll go on to the next slide. What to tell somebody if they say they're not a target? Everybody is a target. Really, it comes down to who are you a target of? If you're a small company making $50 million a year, you might not be having nation state actors attack you, right? But somebody's going to be. A lot of the attacks today are automated. Credential stuffing attacks, phishing attacks, they're automated. It doesn't necessarily matter who you are. They're just going to turn them on, focus them on a company or an IP address. They don't necessarily know what you have. They're going to target you, and there you go. So 40% of all cyber breaches impact businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees. I think that's a pretty valuable number. So thinking that you're a small company and you're not going to be affected is just not realistic. 61% of small, medium businesses were the target of a cyber attack in 2021. Very large number again. Nearly 60% of small businesses that fail within 6 months of being hacked. So if you're a small business and you get hacked, you're probably going to have a hard time staying in business. So you may think you're not a target, but are you willing to risk that? Because what happens if you are? So proving the value there is, we may not be a target, but are we willing to risk something happening, an automated attack hitting us? And if we do, are we going to be able to weather that storm, especially for a smaller company? So that's very important. The biggest industries targeted, if people are curious: public administration, retail, education and research, finance and insurance, and healthcare. Those are the big ones. And if you're in those, you definitely are a target. But if you are not in those, it doesn't mean you're not a target. Get a couple comments in the chat. A lot of complaints about our MFA. People don't like MFA. MFA is intrusive. If you can still have MFA and have it be less of a barrier, if it can be adaptive and smart MFA, that's a much better way to go. But it's more costly and more time involved to implement. Communication barrier. So what does it mean to speak business? We talked about this earlier. Don't use acronyms. If you're talking to a board, if you're talking to a C-suite, they don't know what security acronyms are. They don't know what technology acronyms are. You have to spell everything out. Security risk versus business risk. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. As I said earlier, executives care about business risk, not security risk, when it really comes down to it. Share relevant metrics. The board doesn't care how many viruses you stopped. They really don't. Maybe you have an antivirus program that is working great. Maybe you're using EDR, advanced endpoint detection, and it's stopping everything that's coming through. That's not really helpful to them. They want to know other things like how many passwords have been hacked or exposed. What's the percentage of data that we have encrypted? Do we have data that's valuable out there that's not encrypted? How long does it take to fix critical security issues? What the penetration test results look like. If you're hiring a third party to do a test on your systems, what were the results? How many people are getting trained on security? These are some of the numbers that boards care about. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're talking the right language and talking the right metrics and speaking to them about things that matter to them. So I'm going to go through a few examples here. So API gateway, right? An application programming interface gateway. They're not going to know what that means. So tell them you need to protect your endpoints that other companies connect to. That's how you spin that. You just have to find a way, in a sense, to dumb it down a little bit. Executives are far from dumb, but you need to bring it back to its basic words and help them understand that. So if you talk about shifting left in the SDLC pipeline, what's that going to mean to an executive or to a board member? People probably know what SDLC here means, but software development lifecycle. Instead, you can tell them we want to insert security early and often in the software development process, because if we don't, we might find problems after they go live. And if we do that, then customers might tell us before we know about them. So that's a very impactful way to talk about shifting left in your application development. So yeah, the board cares about business risk, not security risk. What's the bottom line? Acceptable risk might to the board might be keeping a legacy payroll system active, because without it, you can't pay people. Maybe it's not patchable anymore, but you can isolate it to a certain segment of the network. As a security practitioner, that kind of boils your blood a little bit, because you have like a Windows 95 machine running payroll software, but maybe it's going to cost $2 million to replace it. Is it worth that to them? Probably not. So they're not going to spend that money if you can just isolate it and kind of absorb that risk a little bit. So something that might not be an acceptable risk is, let's say you have a public-facing system that is where you pay all of your vendors and where you invoice all of your vendors. And turns out it's an old system and it's not patchable. But if it goes down, you can't pay anybody. that's going to be pretty impactful, and you're probably going to get whatever you need to get that done. Because if you can't pay your vendors and you can't pay anybody, that's going to have an impact on the business. That's not just a security risk, it's a business risk. Let's go on to the next one. Getting near the end of this stuff here. Did want to talk about application security specifically. Not that it's a barrier to proving value of security, but every company is really a software company, as I've talked about, even if you're not, maybe you don't have an app, maybe you aren't selling software, but you're developing something, you're coding, you're doing something internally. Software engineers exist in every company, pretty much. Maybe not if you're a small medical office, you might not have a software engineer. But generally speaking, software engineers are at all companies. You're probably coding somewhere. Don't forget to show the value of good application security as well. Lack of proper application security can also cause business interruptions and expensive downtime. So getting security involved early and often in the development lifecycle, as we talked about, it can help prevent longer downtimes. I've been in situations where a customer found a vulnerability in the code. Not ideal, right? It happens, but it's not ideal. Assuming that's not happening all the time, that's okay. Because you're going to have that. You're going to have bug bounty hunters that are going to find issues in your code as well. But the more that you can find, the earlier in the process, the better. So you use your application security tools to prove value. How many clear text secrets did you find embedded in your code? Probably some. Every company I've been to has had them, right? Can you find them? Can you remove them so that somebody else doesn't find them, especially if it's code that could be accessed externally? Very, very important. How many critical security issues are you finding? What's the time to patch? So use these tools as well when you're proving value. You can show real life incidents and how they've impacted a company. The Twitter API vulnerability leaked 220 million email addresses. LinkedIn had an API issue as well that leaked 700 million records. So very important. If you don't secure your endpoints and you don't secure your application security program, you could run into some issues. So I'm going to tell you a fun story here, and it's also a story about failing open instead of closed. I worked somewhere, one of my mini companies, I'm not going to share which one. They had MFA, and MFA broke, but somewhere deep within the code, there was a failsafe that allowed anybody to log in without a username and password. So when MFA broke, anybody in the public, it was public facing interface, anybody could log in without a username and password because somebody somewhere along the way in the many lines of code put that in when they were testing and never took it back out again. So there it was. We shut it down really fast, took that code out, and yeah, that was a great one. So very important, and application security can be used to prove value as well. So remember that. Go on to security as a business enabler. Next slide. So security really can be a business enabler. I think we talked about that throughout the presentation. It can help prevent outages and downtime, which is very valuable to the business. It can prevent regulatory issues and fines, another business win, protects your company reputation. It can make the life of the customer easier in some cases. We talked about how you could do that with protecting authentication and making it better, but also making it easier for the customer. Don't be known as the no team. You're not an enabler if you're no team. And you can make security fun and personal. Maybe it's how you do your training. Maybe you make it personal so that when you're doing your regular security training, you talk about how to protect their home life as well. Get people interested in security any way you can. Maybe you do a lunch and learn about protecting your home internet router and how you secure it. That's valuable because it teaches people about security, even though you're teaching them to secure their home. It gets them in the security mindset, and that's what you need to do. Go on to the next slide. I'm just going to talk about some of these resources real quick. I just put some resources I thought were pretty valuable. So there's Udemy has some nice courses. I think there's a cybersecurity for developers course that is really good. If you're not familiar with the OWASP top 10, I linked that there as well. Chief Security Officer Online has a great article about the biggest data breaches of the 21st century, which is pretty eye-opening. There's an article on Indeed I found that is great information about communicating with executives and how you do that effectively. There's a link on Shift Left Security from Sneak, which is a great tool, not a cheap tool, but a great tool. And then there's a great report from IBM on data breaches and the impacts. Looking at the chat. That was all I had. So happy to open it up for questions and anything else that people want to talk about with security.
I don't know if we do raise hands. Okay. Is it okay if I asked? I don't see anyone else with a raised hand.
Yes,
Yeah,
Paulina,
let's
go
do that,
ahead.
Paulina. Yeah.
Okay. First, thank you for the talk. Super cool. I think something like the saying no versus being an enabler is something that I've frequently encountered. I am guilty of having been the no person in the past. I have since learned. But I feel like there's a bit of a trade-off between saying yes to everything and saying no to everything, right? Like there's definitely a point in the middle. It's I think both are equally bad. I guess do you have any experiences or have you heard or do you know, etc. Um, when is saying yes to like being an enabler? When are you enabling too much, right? Like at which point
Mm.
do you take it back and tell the business, the managers, the directives, right? Like, hey, I understand what you want to do, but think about the implications that this has for everything, right? Not just like your feature, not just your app, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. My yeses are generally yes, but uh, there's a difference between a yes and a yes, but I don't go around saying yes to everything people want to do, but I do take a careful look. It's really a case-by-case situation, and what they bring to you and what is the risk of it if you say yes to them. Or maybe you need to say yes, but maybe you need to tweak it a little bit. Or maybe you want to say no because it's a super bad risk and they say, we have to do this or we're going to lose millions of dollars, right? This could happen. Then that becomes a business decision and you hopefully have a risk acceptance process. You have a risk acceptance form. You have them fill that out and say, I understand that security is uncomfortable with this, but I think we have to do it. We had this happen at one of my prior companies. One of the executives hired a family member and had them be doing some work, and there were some certain things I wasn't comfortable with, and ultimately I lost that battle, right? So in that case, I did want to say no, but it's hard to say no to the CEO and the CEO's brother. So you get them to sign off on it or at least get it in writing. So I think it's important that it's no, yes, and yes, but. And then if you want to say no or yes, but, you have them fill out a risk acceptance form. And then let's see who else we have here. Trying to look at the raised hands. Leslie?
Yeah. One, thank you. And also thank you for taking my first question early. Um, I want to first I'm going to ask on behalf of Lena in the chat, who's looking for open tools for security. In your links, your very first link was a Udemy course
Uh-huh.
for cybersecurity for developers. Is that where you would recommend for folks to start?
Yeah, I think that's a great course. Yeah.
Great. And so now my question. And if that's all right, or do you have more to add?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned adaptive and smart MFA. Like, what does that look like? Because I tried Googling kind of quickly to see if that was like if adaptive
Yeah.
MFA was a keyword, and I couldn't find anything. I mean, in 30
Yeah, it's
seconds.
probably adaptive MFA. It might be a vendor reference, but really you don't need to present somebody with multi-factor authentication every time they log in. Maybe they have changed their password recently. Maybe they're using a different device. Maybe they're logging in from a different location, or maybe the same location, but they have a different computer that they haven't ever used before. So you can look at those type of signatures when people are logging in, and maybe you prompt them for MFA if something is dramatically different. Instead of just saying every time you log on, you have to do multi-factor, because that's a lot more intrusive to the user experience.
Um, I know for CAPTCHAs, like the CAPTCHA when you like choose the bicycle, don't they're not actually checking whether you choose a bicycle. They're checking if your behavior looks like a human versus looks like a computer. Is that
Yeah,
also part of when you do when we talk about
it
adaptive
is.
MFA, is that also the types of checking you're doing?
It is. You can also do CAPTCHA on in an adaptive type way as well, where you're not always being presented with CAPTCHA unless something is different about your login.
I also want to note to Chase. makes me log in every time.
Yeah.
So
Unfortunately, some companies do that. That's probably they're taking a hard stance on security. They're making you log in every time, and they probably don't care about the user experience because they know that your money is in the bank and you need to access it. Sasha.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you so much, Jessica, for talking today. It's funny because I'm working like on a project very close to this. I'm like, oh wow, we're working on integrating, a third-party auth system and, figuring out what our tech requirements are for that. And, coming from a legacy system where like we do require MFA on like every login and like, hearing the complaints about that for the past couple of years. So it's funny when you said, I'm like, oh wow, that's exactly what we're dealing with. Um, but like in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna be collaborating with security and with like the vendor that we end up choosing. I guess like from a security perspective, like is there like what you wish developers would come to you with? I feel like in my company we're like starting to develop, relationships with security and like having some kind of like risk process, but I think it's still early days and like we're never sure how to communicate with security.
That is a great question. We are working through this right now where I work. It's a process. Our developers are very busy. They're doing stuff that the business tells them to do. They're saying, go make this application, go do that, go fix this code. So from a security perspective, what I would want is just I'd like to know what the developer's doing. It might not even be a security related project, but I want to know what's going on. Are there stand-up meetings that I could show up to? Is there any type of education that I could get? Are there roadmaps on what projects you're working on? Are there whatever ticketing system you use? Are there tickets that you use to create when you're writing new code? And can I get looped in on those tickets? I think more is better than not enough. Like I would rather get bombarded with tickets about new features being added in the software than miss a feature that's getting added that could have a security implication. So I think any security team would be more than happy to get extra information in that sense than not enough, because it's really valuable to know what's going on on the development side.
That's good to know. I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes we're like, oh, is this security related? Would they care? And like for this project, yeah, it's very obvious, but I can see that being kind of blurry for projects that don't seem related. Um, but that's good to know. I think it's awesome to see like in the past couple of years, we've definitely had more training and relationships with security. And I think we're just like, okay, let's make this work. But yeah, thank you so much for your talk because this is very relevant to what I'm working on.
Good deal. Carlos.
So I actually just wanted to piggyback a little bit on that, because that's kind of one of the things that I'm actually working on. And so just, this take it for what it is, but having the benefit of being the SRE manager and the cybersecurity engineering manager, my model with my team is actually, my team is sublinear. And so I have one SRE in every development scrum team. And so they actually attend everybody's stand-ups and groomings and everything. And so from a reliability perspective, they're there to become SMEs on the software. But because I took on the security hat, I baked in security practices into it. So it's like, okay, not only look for reliability opportunities in the software, but it's also look at security opportunities in the software. And so what we've done is built what, at least for net new projects, is called a new service request model. And so because a lot of times it's very easy for developers to say, hey, I have this new service that needs to go into production. But especially for larger companies, there's infrastructure, there's, ports, or if you're using an API gateway, we have to build all that, cloud infrastructure around it. And yes, thank you, sorry, for the SME acronym. And so what we've done is whenever we tell, and I try to champion this with my team, is like, hey, if you guys identify that there's a new service being built out, we have to do the new service request meeting, which everybody hates, but at the same time, it's very enlightening because you bring in DevOps, SRE, security, dev, QA, product, and program management all into your room, and architecture if there's an architecture team, and say, hey, describe what you're building. It's not a, hey, we're going to slap your hand and don't do this type. It's more to say, hey, so everybody can see what, because development focus on the product, right? On the feature that they're trying to
Yeah.
enhance, but they don't look at, if you're going to need port 22 for whatever reason, like, okay, you might want to you want to take a step back and figure out what are you trying to accomplish, right? And so it's just a great opportunity to say, well, you need this port open, or maybe we need to create a new VPC rule. I work in AWS, so it's part of my terminology, but there are security groups and everything that has to be implemented along the way. And so the developers don't take that into consideration, but it allows other teams as well to kind of start planning that work so that when dev is saying, hey, this is ready to go to prod, we've already built out that infrastructure along the SDLC with the associated security scans, because that's also another thing that we try to bake in is we do a lot of security scans at the code level, static analysis, as well as vulnerability management. So anyway, just something in case anybody wants to share, take that away in some shape or form.
Yeah, that's great. All those scans that you do you have a good remediation and follow-up for the findings that you have?
Yeah, so essentially what we do is anything that shows up as critical, we immediately fail in the SDLC. And so anything that's legacy, unfortunately, because that's always the case, anything that's critical, we create an immediate security bug, we call them. And essentially it's a Jira ticket that has to be closed before the release. Now, if it's a high, we kind of will wave our hand at it and be like, okay, just get it fixed by next release. But anything medium or low, we're like, okay, just get it done before the end of the quarter. But we still create all that backlog item so that I have kind of like a monthly meeting with product, and I say, hey, here's all the backlog items for reliability that we've created. Here's all the backlog items for security that we've created that the development teams need to prioritize based off of their urgency. And we are a PCI based environment because we deal with credit card transactions a lot. So we get a little bit of an extra say when we have those conversations. And plus being ISO certified as well, we actually bring those conversations to the board as well. And so that's kind of have the same conversation multiple times, but it helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. All right. Somebody asked a question in here I was going to answer before I go on to the next one, but about additional resources for learning security concepts. I would definitely read through the OWASP website if you haven't. I linked it in the resources slide. There's a lot of really good information in there. It's pretty readable too. If you're new to that world, I think that's a great site to familiarize yourself with. There's probably some other free resources. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't have them, but I know some people love listening to security podcasts, and those are free. Florentina.
My company doesn't have any security team, but we have an SRE team, and they kind of also do a little bit of security stuff. And now we're getting SOC 2 certified. And we just have to add like auth-c plugins, and like one team built that, and now all of our everybody who owns a service has to add that. But I've been thinking about that, and even if I bring it up to my manager, like he's also saying like exactly what you were saying before, like we just don't have time to do more stuff. And like I just wonder how is that enough, or is that normal, or what is SOC 2? Is that
SOC 2 is good. I find it fascinating that you don't have a security team, and who's gonna be in charge of the SOC 2 compliance without a security team?
I think SRE team does all of that.
Okay. Very interesting.
SOC happens.
What was that?
Because unfortunately, it somehow always lands on SRE teams.
Yeah, well, Yeah, so yeah, SOC 2 is good. It's gonna give you a good assessment of your security program. It's something that you need to do every year. But I'm assuming they want to do that because your customers are asking for that, right? So I think it's going to be valuable to have for that reason.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's just like odd changes. For example, we're not allowed, I mean, it's never good practice, but now they're tracking if somebody merges a PR themselves that they opened, stuff like that, and that's part of SOC 2. And
Yeah.
I just wish to I tried to Google it, but it's not even ChatGPT was helpful with that. So I just
Oh,
wondered,
wow.
like, what is the overall gist of SOC 2? How is that different to other certifications? Or
It's like it has its nuances, just like any certification that you're going to do. You know, when PCI first came out, they said you have to use a firewall, which didn't really make a whole lot of sense because it didn't tell you you had to, you know, do anything with the firewall, just that you had to use one. So there are certainly some things in SOC 2 that are gonna feel like they're not gonna make a lot of sense, but overall, it's gonna help your security as a company. Um, as far as merging the code yourself, I think that's part of the separation of duties that we're trying to do. They don't want one person to have the keys to the kingdom in any sense when it comes to pushing code to production. So that's the reason for that. It's difficult to do in a smaller company, though. Separation of duties is really hard when your company's smaller, and unless you have a larger team, and maybe that's an argument you can make that you can't satisfy that requirement without more resources on your team in order to be compliant with SOC 2. I'm sure there's some things in SOC 2 that you could use to leverage getting additional security work and resources.
okay, thank you very much.
Leslie.
I want to thank you for your one-on-one tutoring session for me. All my questions being answered.
Not a problem.
Towards the end, you mentioned bug bounties, and would it be expected if a company has a public-facing API, would it be just a good security practice to get them to offer bug bounties? Are there I know
That's a
big
good
companies
question.
have them, but it seems like as a smaller
Yeah.
company, like, is there a place that you can like just register? Like, is there an intermediary that facilitates those bug bounty programs, or?
Yeah, I could talk about that. First of all, I don't think you want to do a bug bounty program unless you've first done some pen tests yourself, especially if you're going to pay out money. So maybe you want to do some testing of your perimeter first and testing of your APIs. When you feel like you're in a little bit better state, then you can potentially do the bug bounty program, and you can really do it two different ways. There are some companies out there, Bug Crowd is one of them, and they kind of facilitate the whole program for you. They handle all the payments for you. I think part of it depends on how many bug bounty requests you think you're going to get. We get a few, so we actually do it internally. If you go to getweave.com, you can find our bug bounty information on there. And if it's a certain severity of finding, we will pay it out. And if it's not, we tell them thank you for your time, but we only pay out if it's a certain criticality. So we've just kind of done that internally. And we use the kind of the terminology and the process that some of these other companies have used, but we just do it internally ourselves because we couldn't really justify hiring a company to do it with the volume that we have. So I think if you have a large enough volume, you definitely want a company to manage it for you because you're just going to get bombarded with bug bounties. They may not be ones you're going to pay out on, but you're going to get a lot once it's public. So. Oh, one more thing about that is if you do hire one of those companies, they're actually going to list your company as a company that is part of the program. So by nature, you're going to get more people trying to attack your APIs and your websites. Whereas ours is just on our site. So somebody has to know we have one in order to go find it. I think if we went to one of those companies, we'd probably see a lot more people testing against our company.
And the advantage would be it's a trade-off, right? Because how you have it, you don't get as many, but also you then don't also have a lot of like hits on your system that trying to like,
Right. But also if
yeah.
you're doing your application security program properly, you shouldn't be getting bombarded with critical findings, right? From the bug bounty hunters. In a world where things are being done right on the back end, you don't have to worry as much about the critical findings. You'll have some, but not a lot of them. Any other questions? And I did include my LinkedIn contact. If anybody wants to talk to me, question me offline, feel free to connect. Happy to help anybody out anytime.
I have one more question. But you mentioned podcasts. Do you have any recommended podcasts for security?
You know, I don't. If one of my employees has some, I can find them. So if you ping me on LinkedIn, I can probably get the answer for you. But
Oh, awesome.
I keep telling myself I should get into podcasts and I don't. But
The pandemic definitely helped me get into podcasts. But
yeah, I think, yeah, for sure. Yeah, Latha?
Hi, Jessica. I had a question.
Hello.
You mentioned uh, different levels to where, cybersecurity is important, right? Like in application level and even when coding phases and all that stuff. Like with respect to testing for cybersecurity issues and threats, what are the main points that we have to know about from the testing perspective? I mean,
From testing on the application side?
yes, and also if there are other aspects from which testing is done for cybersecurity, because I am I am not worked in cybersecurity domain specifically, but I've worked on a little bit on networking side. So I was curious to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, from the application side, I think I'm gonna lean on OWASP again. They have the list of the top 10. Those are really good things to test against and pay attention to. You can buy some, there are some tools out there that will scan against them for you. On the network side of things, you can use tools like Nessus. You should probably have some sort of tool that's scanning all of your devices on your network. If you have a network, we are we're completely in the cloud at Weave. So we have just workstations on our network, unless you're remote, like some of our workforce, like me is. Um, but if you do have a data center, if you do have a network with servers on it, you should also be scanning those for vulnerabilities as well. You should be scanning on the website to make sure that your external footprint is protected. There's different tools you can use for that as well. But hopefully that was helpful. And did that help answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, because
Okay.
cybersecurity is specialized, right? Like you can work in networking, but still you wouldn't have particularly tested it or looked into that per se. So that's why I was curious about that. I had another question,
Yeah.
if I may ask,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
this is not specifically to the presentation, but it's rather general. Uh, I am trying to upskill myself and bridge my gaps in networking, as I've not academically studied computer networks as such, but whatever I learned was on the job, not even like a mentoring on the job, but just whatever features were assigned to me and that way. But now I'm working on a different project and I want to get back to networking. I'm upskilling and going about, learning concepts which I feel I had not learned or learned the wrong way. If that makes any sense, because now I realize networking was not taught the way it had to be taught in university for like even an introduction to computer networks.
Mm.
So do you have any suggestions there? Like, are there any communities that I could get involved? Because most of the events that I see are either coding related, like general, but not
Mm.
networking per se, right? Like I've got some advisors where they say if you're learning coding, concentrate on coding. Why are you learning networking along with coding? It's difficult for me to explain, right? Because I like networking, and like you said, all these
Mm-hmm.
companies, they if you're applying for a software engineer job in the networking companies, you have to know both.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there are any communities, because I remember you said about CISO, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would check some of the user groups, like from some of the networking companies, like Cisco user group. You know, go to the vendors and see if they have any local user groups. That might be a good way to network with other people and learn more about networking as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm using Cisco online community, like where we can ask some questions and stuff, because I was looking for a reference material. So Cisco certs are the first ones out there, and I've
Yeah.
gone down that rabbit hole. But I don't know if that's what I have to do. But I'm
sure
doing
there's a
that.
local user group too that you could join.
Okay, I have to look into that. I'll do that because some are in person, like I don't know, was it Georgia or some other state where I saw on Meetup? They have in-person groups, but I'm not able to attend them. So that's why I was looking for something over here in, Bay Area or in California, which are virtual either or in person here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the user groups would be the way to go to look for local user groups.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Leslie?
I think we need to wrap up, but if you have a question, when we talk about cost, when we see it on the news, $2 billion, how many, like, what is counted on that? Or maybe a better question, who does that accounting? Is the cybersecurity people the people who like count up like how much it costs the company to be able to then make the case? Like if I'm going to go up and say, hey, we need cybersecurity, I'm going to pull out that Twitter, however many $700 million, and they ask me, well, what is that? How did that cost them? How would I find that out? Like
it depends. It depends on the size of the company, but the cybersecurity people aren't really going to be doing that. It's going to be probably legal working with the business on that. Yeah, because if it's that big of a breach, then legal is involved and legal is leading the investigation, because once you have sensitive data breach, credit card breach, legal has to lead that investigation. So they would be the ones helping pull together all that cost, and security would probably be maybe involved in how much should it cost to remediate, because what goes into that cost is how much does it cost to remediate? What was the business interruption? How much was your downtime? How much did you have to pay in lawsuits, or how much did you have to pay for credit monitoring, or all of those things are part of that number is what they go into that.
yeah, so if I wanted to make this case at a company, I would have to like preemptively, hey, I think we should do this thing. It could save us this much money. I would have to go talk to a different team and say, what would it cost to remediate? Like have that conversation with.
You would. There are some numbers out there about what the average cost per
Yeah, you had the average.
breached record is. I think it's $180 or $190. So that is up real fast. If you have 100,000 customers and they all get their data exposed, you multiply that times $180, and that's probably going to be the cost of your breach. So that data is out there that you can look for and pull that data if you need that as a reference as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's much better than the like average breach for billions.
That's one of the ways that insurance companies factor how much insurance you need as well, as they look at your company and how many records you have and what it would cost per record generally, and that's how they determine what your cyber policy limit should be.
I want to say thank you again so much.
You're welcome.
Gemma-Dean, would you like to wrap us up?
Yeah, I'm just going to give Jessica a chance to answer Lena's last question, and then we're going to take that as the last question in the chat.
Mentorship programs for cybersecurity or networking related roles. I don't know of any personally. I think the best bet is to find somebody in the industry and talk to them and learn from them. That's what I did when I was starting out. Just find people to talk to. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's 4 or 5 people. Look for people on LinkedIn if you can, or maybe people within your company that are willing to talk to you and mentor. But I'm not familiar with any specific organizations for that. And then, yeah, the slides can be shared if people want to see them.
This recording will also be available on Women Who Code YouTube channel as well for anyone who wants to review. All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. That was just amazing. Really quickly, as we wrap up, we generally like to take a picture, if that's okay for everybody. And we'll give everybody a couple